Okay, good morning, everybody. Everyone's doing well. Let's go ahead and pray and get started here, and then we'll continue on. We're entering into chapter 6, so let's go ahead and pray, and we'll start. Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for this time. I pray, God, that this would be beneficial and profitable for us to dig through and to learn and to know. And thank you so much, God, for your word and how clear it is, discussing not only the future of Israel, but also the future of Babylon and how it all ties together. We thank you so much, Lord, for it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay, so today we are actually halfway through this book. That doesn't mean that it's going to get any easier from here. As a matter of fact, we'll probably be in the last 6 chapters for a good while. But until that time, I thought it would be appropriate to grease the skids for chapter 6 because we have there's new management, right? Nebuchadnezzar and basically his line in the line of kings has ended. And now we have a kind of a new empire rising here, and Daniel finds himself in the middle of this. So let's go ahead and jump in here. On our timeline, we are kind of 539 BC-ish. We're getting ready to kind of jump into another empire. Daniel is now about 69 years old, give or take, at the end of Belshazzar's reign. So this kind of ends the reign of the Chaldeans here, and now ushers in kind of the reign of the Persians and the Medians. As I mentioned before, we're kind of looking at this. We're kind of using this as a map here. This image, of course, we now the Babylonian Empire, at least. This empire is ended, and now the Medo-Persian Empire now holds essentially authority over Babylon and the region of Babylon. That's kind of the idea here. So from the previous lecture, for the previous lesson, Daniel is summoned to give the explanation of the writing on the wall to Belshazzar. Remember, this was during a celebration, a celebratory feast where everyone was there. Kings were there, his rulers were there, his wives were there, concubines were there, everybody was there. And it seems that the writing on the wall was a judgment due to Belshazzar's pride, that is, influenced or informed by his idol worship. God essentially would condemn him, punish him by removing him, killing him essentially, and him being conquered and his kingdom being divided among the Persians and the Medes. Okay. And so we come to this particular statement here that Daniel makes at the end of chapter 5, or at the start of chapter 6, if you had the Aramaic text. Chapter 5, verse 31 begins chapter 6. I don't know why we divide it, but that's just how it is. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. This is the only statement we're going to be looking at because we have to do some background work. Whenever we have an important figure that is mentioned by any of these authors, we got to do a case study, right? So this is going to be lots of history here, right? Daniel, due to Belshazzar being slain and Nabonidus being captured, Darius the Mede received the kingdom. So what is a Mede? And what does that mean? Well, let's take a look here. Mede is the Aramaic text. Darius the Mede. This word occurs one time in the Hebrew scriptures. In the Aramaic text. It corresponds with the Hebrew word with the same spelling. Okay? Again, as Aramaic and Hebrew are very similar. This word Mede means middle land, Darius of the middle land, right? This word is associated with those essentially who are the descendants of Japheth and dwelled in the land of what became known as Mede. So now we have to take a look at the origin of this empire. We find the origin, by the way, of this empire in Genesis 10. Genesis 10, verses 1 and 2, discussing again the descendants of Noah. So now these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah. And sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai. Madai is the origin of Mede, and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. Okay. So Mede, or Madai, where one of the sons of Japheth dwelled, Mede was known as the ancient region located in the country of Iran. Okay. This will become important later on, so hold that thought. Okay. This is a map of the Median Empire. Pretty huge. Okay. Of course, they expanded their reach. This is Cappadocia right here, way beyond here, the Bactria. And I mean, this is a pretty huge place. Okay. Of course, you have the Babylonian Empire here. Right smack dab in the center, this is the Median heartland, this triangle right here. Okay. This is where most of the tribes dwelt during the rise or the start of the Median Empire. Okay. They were found in this area here. Okay. So let's take a look here. There were many tribes that dwelt within the region of Mede. Okay. As a matter of fact, a historian by the name of Herodias divided them into 6 specific tribes. Okay. He kind of records this in his writings. He says this: Darius then united the Median race alone and was the ruler of this, and of the Medes, these are the tribes which here follow, namely Busai, the Parthenians, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. We'll call them the S's. That's what we'll call them. Arizatinians, Budians, and Magians. The tribes of the Medes are so many in number. So even though there was a whole bunch of individuals that dwelt there, Herodias divides them into about 6 tribes within that region. Now, who is this guy? I have this individual here, Darius. Well, the Median Empire had rose to its greatest height. There were, again, like I mentioned, there was a bunch of tribes within this region, but they didn't really get along with each other very well. You know, they were kind of jockeying for position and power. It wasn't until a gentleman by this name, or Darius, this is this guy. Okay. I don't know why they spelled it the way it is. Maybe there was some clerical errors or something like that, or clerical corrections. But nevertheless, this is this guy right here. He united the Median race alone and was the ruler. He became the first ruler of all of these tribes. Okay? Darius, according to Herodias, was the one who promoted the law among tribes who appeared to be lawless. Not that they were lawless, they just had their own laws within their own tribes, and sometimes they warred with one another. He rose among them to become essentially the first king of all of those tribes and established a law among them that all the tribes would live under. Okay. It seemed due to his zeal and his disposition, the tribes of Media saw fit to make him into a king. There was no king, according to Herodotus, before this gentleman. Actually, the Medians, since they were a large group of tribes or clans, again, they related to one another based upon language, on culture, and practices that were found within the specific region. I would even assume, too, that they even had different deities depending on the tribe and what they were doing. Again, this individual deitist seemed fit to unify them under one banner. Again, yet before their unification as a kingdom, again, they were in constant conflict with each other, always battling and warring against one another. We find this, this is rather long, okay, so bear with me, but this is important for our discussion this morning about the Median Empire and how it came to be. Herodotus, in History's Book 1, chapters 96 and 97, again, I apologize for the long text, but I kind of don't. Okay, let's read it here. There appeared among the Medes a man of great ability, whose name was Darius, and this man was the son of Pheretes. This Darius, having formed a desire for despotic power, did thus: whereas the Medes dwelt in separate villages, he, being even before that time of great repute in his own village, set himself to practice just dealing much more and with greater zeal than before. And this he did, although there was much lawlessness throughout the whole of Media, and although he knew that injustice is ever at feud with justice. And the Medes of the same village, seeing his manners, chose him for their judge. So this individual Darius seems to be a man of justice, right? A man who was essentially, perhaps maybe a very charismatic man. People gravitated to him, and he had a knowledge, it seems, for the law. And so they made him a judge. So he, since he was aiming at power, was upright and just, and doing thus, he had no little praise from his fellow citizens, insomuch that those of other villages, learning that Darius was a man who more than all others gave decision rightly, whereas before this they had been wont to suffer from unjust judgments. Themselves also, when they heard it, came gladly to Darius, having their causes determined, and at last they trusted the business to no one else. So there was a lot of injustice, it seems. Everybody was kind of doing everything that they felt was right. And as a result, there was a lot of unjust decisions, right? Until this individual came along and decided to assert himself. Everybody thought that that was the best thing to do, was to make him a judge. And as a result of this, the judgments that he made, according to the tribes around him, were appropriate. Right? Then, as more and more continually kept coming to him, because men learnt that his decisions proved to be according to the truth, Darius, perceiving that everything was referred to himself, would no longer sit in the place where he used to formerly sit in public to determine causes, and said that he would determine causes no more, for it was not profitable for him to neglect his own affairs and to determine causes for his neighbors all throughout the day. So they were coming to him so much, he couldn't get his own things done. He's like, look, I can't do this anymore, right? So then, since robbery and lawlessness prevailed, even much more in the villages than they did before, the Medes, having dissembled together in one place, considered one another and spoke about the state in which they were. I suppose the friends of Darius spoke much to this effect. Seeing that we are not able to dwell in the land under the present order of things, let us set up a king from among ourselves, and thus the land will be well governed, and we ourselves shall return to our labor and shall not be ruined by by lawlessness. By some such words as these, they were persuaded themselves to have a king. So the historian Herodias writes again that as Dioceas was living under this, particularly this tribal rule, and all of these feuds were happening, he decided to judge for a time. There were so many judgments that people were coming to him to deal with. He decided not to do this anymore. And so because they wanted, of course, him to govern well, they made him king, which is kind of interesting. So one of the reasons, again, for their unification, too, was not only that they were experiencing inward conflict, but they were also experiencing constant attacks of the Assyrians from the east. Of course, this would weaken them as a people, not only with their internal conflicts, but also the invasions that were coming from other empires and other lands from the outside of their region. One of the important years was the year of 612 BC. Okay. Of course, Assyrians were bullying the Medes, okay? And it wasn't fair to them. They didn't like that sort of thing. So what happened was the Babylonians, during the year of 1625, sought to conquer the Assyrians, right? But they were in large part unsuccessful. The Babylonians sought to conquer the Assyrians and bring them under their control. But it wasn't until Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar is the father of Nebuchadnezzar. In 1625, he believed that the forces of Assyria were losing strength. He kind of got some intel, and he discovered that the armies of Assyria weren't as strong as they were in days past. And so Nabopolassar sought to conquer the Assyrians. He felt that this was the right time to strike, but he didn't do it on his own. He decided to kind of do it in sequence. So the first order of business, again, was to remove the Assyrian forces from Babylon. Since the Assyrians were powerful, again, they had regions and spots within Babylon, sort of the same thing that the Parthian Empire had within Rome. They had little spots and things like that. So what he did is he removed everyone, all of the Assyrians out, right? That was the T-shirt. Assyrians out, right? Get them out of here. This prevented the Assyrians essentially from coalescing into Babylon really fast, just in case there was an uprising within the people, an attempt to dispossess them. 10 years later, about 615 BC, respectively, he solicited other regions to assist him in taking down Assyria. So he removed them out of his own land, and then he would go to all these other lands. Hey, look, is Assyria mistreating you? Are they hurting you? Right? Are they bullying you? Well, we can do something about that, right? To set up an alliance to take down Assyria. In 1614, a year after, the Medes also were conducting their own campaign against Assyria. So the Medes, in 1614, they invaded, captured, and conquered Assur, which was the original land of the Assyrians, and was also the religious center. So they took hold and possessed the religious center of the Assyrian people. And as we've been talking about culturally, that's a big deal, right? Because if you take over their religious center, you take over their God, right? That's kind of how you did it. So Babylon is rising in an attempt to destroy Syria. The Medes are invading Assyria because they don't like being bullied all this much. And in 1612, Babylon coalesces with the Iranians, the people of Susa, the Scythians, the Medians, the Chaldeans, the Aramites, and the Lydians, and they went up against Nineveh, which is a stronghold of the Assyrians. They fought for 3 months, which is pretty incredible. I mean, you have all of these armies that are coming up against, Nineveh and the Assyrians. I mean, 3 months. You would think that they would take them out with all of these individuals that they're conjoining with. But for 3 months, they fought. And the Babylonians, essentially, with all of their individuals, with all of the people that they were they had alliances with, they destroyed that city. And of course, their king, essentially in 612, was killed. Thus ended the reign of the Assyrians. So the Medes are pretty. They're found all throughout history. That when Daniel is writing this isn't old history. He kind of has all of this in mind when he's writing about Darius in chapter 6 of Daniel. When it comes to Mede, there were 4 significant kings that were kind of highlighted throughout history. Again, one of them we talked about. He is the progenitor of the Median kingdom. He is the one whom all the tribes had made the first king of the Medes, which is respectively, again, 1727 to 675 BC. Then you have Pheretes, which is his son, politically unifying the Median kingdoms and establishing what was known as the Median capital, and the suppression of the tribes from Persia. And as a result of that, they extended their influence. You have Cyaxares from 625 to 585 BC. I don't know why I have BCE there. Oh, I know why I did that, because I copied and pasted it. Yeah, just ignore that E there. Okay, we don't believe in the common era here. It's BC, it's before Christ. Developed a more skilled army and set a revolt against Assyria in 614 BC. This was around the time when essentially the Medes invaded Assyria. And then they wanted to extend the kingdom from the Salt Desert to Anatolia, which is in the west. And then the last significant king was Astrahages. 585 to 550, he sought to conquer Anatolia, but was unsuccessful. He was hindered by the king of Lydia, which is out in the west. Okay. After he was defeated, he married the king's daughter, the king of Lydia's daughter, which is what you did to establish peace between both kingdoms, which was overseen by Nabonidus. Nabonidus oversaw this peace treaty, this by way of marriage between these 2 kings of Lydia and of Media. He was the last king after his defeat by King Cyrus. Okay? Which brings us to about the time that we're in right now, between Daniel. Okay? So Cyrus the Great conquered the Medes, right? And began to use them as an alliance, essentially to conquer other lands, right? This brings us to Darius. Well, who is Darius? There's a couple of challenges with Darius. I don't know how long I spent trying to find him. There's not a lot of historical information on Darius the Mede. However, there are some clues, I think, when we can observe a document known as the Nabonidus Chronicle. Now, of course, there is some speculation as to whether or not this is talking about Darius or not. But I'm going to throw it out there as a possibility. Again, because there's not a lot of historical documentation on Darius the Mede. There's not a lot of it. Okay? But I'm going to throw this out here for your consideration. I think there's some things that we can consider based upon the historical text of the scriptures. If we are convinced that Daniel, the book of Daniel, is not only prophecy, but is actually a historical document, there could be some clues here. Let's look at the Nabonidus Chronicle, and then let's take a look at some things here. The Nabonidus Chronicle says this: the 16th day, Darius, the governor of Gutium, that is Iran, okay, and the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. Well, if we're referencing Daniel 5, verses 1 to 31, that seemed to have happened, right? That same night, Belshazzar was killed. He was disposed. It's interesting. Afterwards, Nabonidus was arrested in Babylon when he returned there. Nabonidus came back to Babylon after his campaign, and he was seized. He was not there, of course, that evening during the time of Daniel 5. But Belshazzar was, right? Till the end of the month, the shield-carrying Gutians were staying within the Isgalia, but nobody carried arms in Isgalia in the building. The correct time for a ceremony was not missed. In the month of Arishamna, the third day, Cyrus entered Babylon, where unidentified objects were filled before him. The state of peace was imposed upon the city. Cyrus sent greetings to all of Babylon. Darius, his governor, installed sub-governors in Babylon. This is interesting. Turn with me to Daniel 6 for a second. I want to underscore something here. You have $1 in here, Will. Yes. Do I get to keep it because I found it? It's an object lesson. Didn't you say I can keep money if you found it or something like that? $1's like not worth anything these days. Daniel 6. I want to note something here. If Daniel is a historical text, this ought to be considered. Daniel verse 1 and 2. Actually, let's look at verse 1, Daniel chapter 6. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, that the king might not suffer loss. This is interesting. Darius, who is Cyrus's governor, installed sub-governors in Babylon. If we're tracking here, it could be that Darius may be Darius. Could be. Because he installed sub-governors in Babylon. That's pretty interesting, considering that the Nabonidus Chronicle mentions this work of Darius. Right? From the month of Kislevu, that is November and December, to the month of Adaru, which is March and April, the gods of Akkad, which Nabonidus had made come to Babylon, were returned to their sacred cities. This is interesting too when we find out again a little bit about Cyrus. We'll talk about that in a minute. In the month of October of November, on the night of the 11th, Gobryas died. If this indeed is Darius, Darius didn't live that long. Okay. If this is who it is talking about, I'm convinced it is, based upon some of this description here within the text and how it coincides with some of the Babylonian history in Daniel, particularly this part here. Let's look at some of these facts. First of all, Gobryas was from the region of Iran. We find that the Medes are from Iran, right? Gobryas entered the region in the city of Babylon along with Cyrus's army, which essentially Cyrus, by way of the order of his army, by the order of Cyrus's authority, entered in, right? So essentially, Gobryas and his army entered in with Cyrus's army, okay? And of course, Gobryas had the authority of Cyrus as well. Gobryas became Cyrus's governor of the city and the region of Babylon. He also established sub-governors in the city of Babylon. Okay? And it says Gobryas passed away a year later after he was installed. Again, this is kind of interesting in terms of, again, the chapter. There wasn't, again, he wasn't really around for that very long, if this is indeed Darius. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Darius and where he's from. The origin of where he's from, some of the history. We talked a little bit about the Nabonidus Chronicle and how this might give us possibly a hint of underscoring in antiquity, essentially, Darius the Mede. What about the law of the Persians and Medes? How does the law of the Persians and Medes function? Well, an established king, or one of the kings who chose and gave that person authority, could establish laws and impose them upon the people. That's pretty standard fare. However, once they made a law and the king signed it with the signet ring or spoke it or however it was transmitted, it could not be undone. Even if the king regretted his decision, once he made it, he couldn't renege on it. Like, oh man, I messed up, right? He couldn't do that. He couldn't exit out. This is very important because we find this in several places. This order of the law of the Persians and the Medes. We see this all throughout the text, especially in the book of Esther. Esther chapter 1, verse 19, we see this considering his cabinet. He says, if it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, that is Ahasuerus, and let it be written in the law of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed. Again, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. Right? For the sake of time, maybe I still have time. How many slides? No, I don't. We're going to have to skip this. Esther chapter 3 underscores the same thing. Okay? That once a law is established by the king, it cannot be undone. Esther chapter 8 verse 8 says the same thing concerning the Jews and them protecting themselves from those who would seek to kill them and take their spoils. It says, now you write to the Jews as you see fit in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring for a decree which is written in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's signet ring that it may not be revoked. Again, in chapter 3, Haman was given the king's signet ring, and he basically gave essentially approval to the annihilation of the Jews living in that region. and possibly outward extended. And that could not be repealed. So the king issues another decree that they have the right to preserve and protect themselves. That's essentially what he's done. There's also evidence of this in antiquity as well. The law of the Persians and the Medes. There's a historian by the name of Diodorus Siculus. Love that name. You got to love that. Where a king or a ruler in high authority had made an edict and then he regretted his decision. Cartamedus' prospects had been high, but he missed their fulfillment because of his ill-timed frankness, and he ended his life in this fashion. Once the king's passion had cooled, he promptly, that is, the king promptly regretted his act and reproached himself for having made a serious mistake, but all his royal power was not able to undo what was done. He basically condemned a man. That man took his life, and he regretted it because he couldn't repeal that once he made that decision. So the law of the Persians and the Medes was when a king or someone in high authority who had been given the authority by the king created a law, they could not undo that. Which underscores, again, what happens in chapter 6, right? Because this is going to happen to Daniel in much the same fashion. Okay? Since Darius the Mede is the vice regent under Cyrus the Great, we ought to take a moment just for a few minutes to do a case study concerning Cyrus the Great and his life. Of course, we could spend an entire time talking about him, but I just want to underscore a couple of things. First of all, his reign was from 559 BC to 529 BC, respectively. Okay, about 30 years, his reign. Some of his major conquests and his works was he basically conquered a city by the name of Ecbatana. This was the Median capital, ruled by Arsaces in 550 BC. If you remember him, he was taken and overruled by Cyrus the Great. Ecbatana was a rich city, by the way. Political power was held there, and then it was established in the Fertile Crescent. So when you took this particular area, you basically have a political stronghold. The king could basically get things done. There was the building of what was known as the Pascarati. This was built after the victory over Arsaces and Ecbatana. The city was built to be the ceremonial capital of the Persians. Okay, this is the place where they would perform worship and throw festivals and things like that. Okay. It also contained several monuments or buildings, which are noted by the following. One of them is a citadel, which stood on a steep hill overlooking the valley or the plain of where this was located. Okay. It was a strategical place to make sure that individuals, if they were to come in and invade them, they would be able to see them very clearly. Then there was one called Palace P, which are just residential buildings and places, probably, where those who had prominence and wealth and influence, they would be able to stay and reside there. Then there was a place called Palace S, which is essentially an audience hall where they would do shows and things like that, festivals, celebrations. And then there were the tombs where Cyrus and his son Cambyses lay. And when he died, they had buried him there. Then we have the conquering of Lydia, which occurred between 550 BC and 539. This is important too, because the king of Lydia was a friend and a brother-in-law to the person who King Cyrus had basically disposed. And he wanted to avenge his friend and his brother-in-law. So Cyrus and Croesus go to battle, but the battle ends in a stalemate. It's a tie, right? Which is pretty amazing. So in the wintertime, during that time, Cyrus pursued him into the region of Lydia and chased him into a location near Turkey. And he used, that is, Cyrus, battle camels. That's kind of cool, right? Battle camels with big spears, right? Could you imagine that? The last thing that you see is Joe Cool's face. Right? Battle camels, not horses, but camels, to push Croesus into the capital city of Sardis, or the capital city of Lydia, which was Sardis at the time. Again, Sardis, we're very familiar with that because of Revelation, right? The region, after 14 days, fell, and Cyrus now had control over Lydia, okay, which was in the northwest of the region. Okay. So you got that. What else do we got? Well, after 539 BC, we have Ecbatana, which is, again, the political capital. We have the building of essentially, it's kind of a victory spot to celebrate the victory over Ecbatana. We have the conquering of Lydia, who is his brother-in-law tried to avenge, but that didn't work out. So right after Lydia, Cyrus turns his sights to Babylon in 539. Now, it's told historically that when Cyrus walked into Babylon, that the Babylonians cheered. That they rolled out the red carpet for him. One of the reasons why this is given is because they believed that Nabonidus was a tyrant, okay, and that he was a very bad guy. And so when Cyrus walks in, everybody cheers because they're not under this tyranny any longer. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's certainly what the history underscores here. While the Nabonidus rejected Marduk for the god Sin, or Nana, Cyrus accepted Marduk and called himself the appointed ruler. So this is kind of interesting, right? He just adopts the god, right? Marduk wanted Nabonidus out, so he raised up Cyrus to be the king here, right? As a matter of fact, in the Cyrus cylinder, this is kind of interesting. Again, another one of these annals of the kings. The Cyrus cylinder historically is similar to that of the Enuma Elish. Interesting. It discusses Marduk's perspective and how Nabonidus was a cruel, evil king. Boo, we don't like Nabonidus, right? Who rejected the ways of Marduk. He rejected the ways of Marduk and was overbearing to the people in his ways. So Marduk became angry and sought a righteous king to take the place of Nabonidus. He just asserts the history. Ain't that something? Throughout all of the searching, Marduk, so who's the worthy person to ascend the throne? It's Cyrus the Great, right? Here's an excerpt from the Cyrus cylinder. I am Cyrus, king of the world. Way to go. Great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumner and Akkad, king of the four quarters, the son of Cambyses, great king, king of Asan, grandson of Cyrus, great king, king of Asan, the descendant of Tasbes, great king, of an eternal line of kingship, whose rule Bel, that's Marduk, and Nabu, love, whose kingship they desire for their heart's pleasure, when I entered Babylon in a peaceful manner. This is why all the false deities were brought back to the Escalia. That's why, because Cyrus is honoring the king or the god of Babylon. Marduk's back in town, guys. He's back again. We're re-racking Marduk again. right? The ending of the Babylonian rule when it comes to the city and region of Babylon is ended and begins the era of the Persian and Median Empire. Daniel, again, finds himself in the center of this kingdom, and I would even say in the center of Marduk. We're going to do it again. Okay? Marduk keeps showing up, right? With that being said, next week we will continue into chapter 6, starting at verse 1 and working ourselves through the text. Let's pray. Lots of history, lots of people, lots of players, lots of interaction, and you're at the center of it all. It's amazing to see just how one empire ends and another one begins, and they just continue to do the same thing as they've always done. It's amazing to me to see that. And at the center of it all, we find your servant Daniel, underscoring that the God of heaven is the true God. It's amazing. May we continue to think about this and ponder the history and all of the works that you have done at this particular time in history. We thank you so much for it's in your son's name. Amen.